Everybody, this is a bit of information that I hope might help you as you're writing up your review paper for Plant Ecology. First step, always for every assignment, is to start by checking the instructions. Here you are asked to choose one of the 14 discussion topics to investigate further. You can also, if you feel like extending yourself, come up with your own topic. But if you're going to do that, come and talk to us about it really soon. Now, the aim of the review paper is to give you experience of synthesizing information and ideas from the current ecological literature and presenting that information in the form of a review that might be published in a proper ecology journal. And the one we've chosen is the Annals of Botany. Your review is a little bit shorter than a standard review for Annals of Botany. We want one that's no more than 1,500 words in length. That's not including the references. And we do also give you 200 words to put in an abstract. And the mark from that review paper will make up 25% of your total grade for this course. Now, if you look at the instructions from the Annals of Botany, you will see what they want you to do. And it's really strongly aligned with what we want you to do. So what we want you to do is to bring together information from a range of different sources. And we want you to think about the intellectual and practical implications of the things that you've read. We would love to see you come up with novel research directions that people could take. We want you to use your judgment and expertise to discuss new work and ideas, to develop new hypotheses, expand and support models, all of this sort of critical thinking stuff. That's what we really want. As with the Annals of Botany, your paper should include a conceptual or summary figure, and I'll talk to you about that later on in this little session. Okay, so your review should also place the subject in context. It should include the most up-to-date references, so not just the ones that we give you as sort of starters. And we want you to sort of try to come out of it nice and positive to move forward the research on your chosen topic. Okay, now looking at the assessment criteria is always essential. You can see there where we put the emphasis when we're actually doing the grading. So first up, down, starting at the bottom here, the conceptual figure. Don't forget that. A lot of people have done in previous years, and that's worth 10% of your grade. Just give us some attempt at a conceptual figure. You'll see the actual good scientific writing and presentation is worth 25%. And we've weighted that fairly heavily because being able to write with good paragraphs and decent grammar and actually convey your arguments in a nice logical and entertaining enough to hold your reader's interest way is really important in ecology and any other discipline. A lot of the grades here are for the depth of understanding of the literature, so that's 35%, and for critical thinking, so thinking deeply about the types of ideas that you're encountering in those papers. So there's more detailed criteria there that you can go through in your own time. So starting out, you've read the instructions, you've got a vague idea what you're trying to do. Next step is to choose a topic. You can find their plant ecology discussion topics on Moodle. There are 14 topics available. And for each one of those, there's like a short little paragraph and 2 or 3 references on that topic. Some of those, the ones that the class is reading, will be available already on Moodle, but there are others that are not on Moodle yet, and we want you to look those up for yourself. You may need to log into the library in order to be able to access those, but figuring out how to access that scientific literature is really important. There is a session recorded on our Moodle page that's about how to do library searches and how to access information from those library resources like the journals. Now, the next step, the 4th step, is to identify the controversy and find an angle that interests you. So for instance, in today's class, we talked about invasive species. Don't try and review everything on invasive species, right? You simply can't do anything worthwhile in 1,500 words on such a massive topic. Narrow it down, take one angle, and really get into the nitty-gritty of that angle. And the thing is, you can take this wherever you want, wherever your interests most strongly lie. Okay, next step, do that library class. It's available on Moodle. It may not be the most exciting class you ever see during your university career, but if you can't search properly the scientific literature and find out the total sum of information that's there, then you're going to have trouble using your scientific information in your next jobs. So please do that. And then once you've figured out how to do it, do a literature search. Now, this is different to just putting in, say, invasive species on Google or even Google Scholar. Using Web of Science allows you to do what's called a Boolean search, where you go, I want invasive species and Australia and plants and whatever, and say competition. And you can really narrow it down, and that gives you all of the results on that. Whereas the Google results, Google's awesome if you've written a sentence and you just want to find a reference to back up what you've said. It's really, really handy for that. But if you want to do a systematic literature review and find out everything that's been written about a topic, then you need to do something more. And Web of Science is the one I recommend for that. Scopus is fine too. Okay, so read the relevant papers. Hopefully this is already starting to get easier for you as we're going through the course. I know it's difficult, but it is an absolutely essential skill for any scientist. You can also find important and interesting information by looking at what those papers that you're reading have cited. So, for instance, if somebody is discussing something that's right on the topic that you're interested in and they cite somebody else's paper, then great, go look up that paper and find out what the early work actually said. Okay, take notes, not just about what the papers say, but about what you think, what ideas you have. And if you notice, for instance, that the ideas in one paper contradict the ideas in another, then note that down as well. So using all of those skills that I'm sure you all have from high school and from other courses. But being able to do this, to bring together that information, absolutely essential. Okay, next step is to make an outline. I always recommend that people start with bullet points. It gives you sort of a greater direction. If you just sort of try and start writing at the top of the page and it's like a mystery novel, you don't know where you're going, you're going to meander a bit and give your reader information that they didn't necessarily need to know. What I want you to do here is to come up with the structure. Think about, now, what are the different things I need to tell my reader for them to understand my argument, to get the important points here? What do I want to highlight, and what's the best order for those points to sit in? So start out with a nice set of bullet points, and then you can turn those into topic sentences. That's the first sentence in a paragraph, and it's the one that kind of tells you the main point of that paragraph. Don't overuse subheadings. You sometimes see people who write and they've basically got a subheading for every single paragraph. If you find yourself doing that, you're overusing subheadings. The trouble with subheadings, they can be really useful signposts, but if you're using a lot of them, they often are in the place of a good logical flow between the different arguments that you're trying to make. And what you really want to do here is to tell your reader a story, take them along with you, take them through the evidence and the argument, and explain to them what you think and why you think that. Back to the basics that I'm sure you all did in high school, we need proper paragraphs. So we want just one idea, one topic per paragraph. But all of the information on that topic should be in the same paragraph. So if you're writing about sort of the impact of herbivory on introduced species, we don't want to see herbivory on introduced species come up in 5 different paragraphs, right? We want that all together so that you're not repeating yourself, because scientific literature is long enough without there being repeated information and duplicates in there. And all of that information goes together in one paragraph. You tell it once well, and then you leave it alone. One thing that a lot of people do, and it's something I used to do when I started out as a writer as well, is to start from my notes that I'd taken on each of those papers that I'd carefully read, and I would rearrange those notes to try and craft them into a story. Now, if you do that, A, it takes a really long time, and B, you end up sort of with a really strange structure and order. You basically include information that shouldn't be included because you're desperate to tell the reader that you'd read this paper as well. What I want you to do is focus on telling a story rather than explaining what each paper said. So we don't want the paragraphs to be, about Smith and West said this. We want the paragraphs to be about a particular idea and to bring together information from different papers that are on that same topic. Okay, next step is to fill in the paragraphs. And really important here, everyone tries to write from the top down to the summary. That's not necessarily the best way to write. What I do is I start with the easiest content paragraphs, and I do the introduction paragraph and the summary paragraph right at the very end when I've read absolutely everything. There's a little graphic here, and this is from a post by Stephen Hurd, who writes the Scientist Sees Squirrel blog, and he also literally wrote the textbook about how to write science papers. And Stephen says it's not lazy to do the easy writing first, and gives the analogy of doing a jigsaw puzzle where a lot of people, not everyone, starts with the edges. And then after that, you might go, oh, I've got all these red pieces, I'll do that bit first. And it's kind of the same. If you know the content, if your bullet point says, I'm going to write a paragraph on this, and you know exactly what you want to say and what things you want to cite, then do that first. And I find that this is a really useful strategy, partly because writing is a bit of a mental game. If you sit there staring at a blank page, it can be absolutely terrifying to try and get started. What you need to do is to just get away from that blank page. And so now you're sitting there, you've got your bullet points, you've done a couple of the easiest paragraphs, and you're starting to feel really good. You're like, yeah, I'm making great progress in writing this paper. And you don't feel that sense of overwhelming despair that can happen as you get confronted with a review paper. Okay, just work on one paragraph at a time, and when you've achieved that, give yourself a break, a reward. So I do this all the time, just saying, okay, first I've got to do this, and then I'm allowed whatever it is. It might be a cookie, it might be a cup of tea, it might be a walk, whatever it is that you really like. Just give yourself reasons to enjoy the progress that you're making. Acronyms are a really big thing. A lot of people use a lot of acronyms in their scientific writing, and it makes things really, really difficult. Particularly if you're a student who doesn't know the field, or particularly if you have English as a second language, or particularly if you're, just reading something slightly outside of what you usually read. So for me, when I read genetics papers, I find them incredibly difficult because they're all full of acronyms, and I don't know what any of the acronyms stand for, except maybe DNA. And it's the same in ecology. Acronyms just don't save that much space and do make it harder for your reader. And I think that's one of the big tricks in writing, is to write for your reader. Have a reader in mind and be working for them. Don't be working to show off what you know. You're trying to tell a story for your reader. Okay, each time in a scientific paper or thesis that you make a statement of fact, you actually have to support that. And you can do that either with a reference to your own analysis or figures, or you can do it with a reference to someone else's work. Obviously, in this one, it's a review paper, so everything's going to be to someone else's work. So even if you say something really obvious, like, the Earth is round, I want you to stick a reference in to support that claim. And that just kind of keeps us honest, that everything we're saying is actually supported by some scientific evidence. And we'll talk about some of the pitfalls of referencing towards the very end of this session. The other thing that people do when they start writing scientific writing is they somehow put in a little monocle and top hat and go back a century or two. I don't know why people start writing words like hitherto and using whilst instead of while and whatever. Just use English that is from this century, that is as easily accessible as possible. You obviously don't want it to be completely casual writing, but you don't want it to be unnecessarily stuffy. And as I said before, have a reader in mind. And when I'm writing a scientific paper, I like to actually bear in mind that my audience isn't always a bunch of people from Sydney who know the same ecosystems and places that I do. So when I write, I actually always write as if I'm writing for someone in Sweden. There's a professor there whose work I really like. His name is Uffe Eriksson. And I always write my papers for Uffe. Now, Uffe doesn't know that. I hope nobody ever sends him this. But I always write my papers and I go, would Uffe know what that is? So if you're using the acronym, say, NSW for New South Wales, would somebody in Sweden know that? I don't think so. So you have to write all of your acronyms out in full. Okay? All right. Next part is your conceptual figure. These are quite fun to do, actually, and they're an increasingly important part of science communication. A lot of papers now come with a visual abstract, and I think they're really, really helpful. So practicing getting your ideas across in a simple, easily interpretable, attractive visual form is, I think, a really important skill, which is why we've included it in this assignment. I suggest you sketch it on paper first. Maybe I'm just old, but doing stuff in your graphics programs does take a little bit longer than actually sketching on a piece of paper. I always start by running my idea past other people. Do they understand what I'm trying to convey, or do they get hung up with something that I haven't even noticed isn't obvious? Check for things like small text. Be very, very careful. Remember when you're writing a thesis or assignment or whatever, a lot of your audience are actually aging nerds. They've got terrible eyes. Don't put in a whole bunch of 6-point font because they may not be able to read it. It's generally just a good idea to keep things legible anyway. It always is important when you're designing graphics to remember that a substantial portion of the population is red-green colorblind. And in plant ecology, this is particularly pertinent because Stephen Bonser is very interestingly colorblind. It's more than red-green colorblind. So just make sure that you're not doing things that make it really difficult for people who do have different vision to you. And next thing you can do is to look at other people's figures and think about what works and what doesn't work. So just going through that, here is a figure from a real scientific paper. Now I look at this and it overwhelms me. The main point I take from this is, oh my goodness, it's very complicated. And if I was to really understand this, I would have to sit down and think about it for really quite a long time. There's a lot of information there, and maybe it's really cool. Maybe this is a really big and important topic, but this author is asking their reader to spend probably 10 good minutes really getting into what their results mean. And that's a lot of time. Most readers are going to kind of just maybe read the headings or just skip over the whole thing if you make it too frightening. So here's a different one, and these are all taken from published papers. I find this one much more effective. It's like, oh, look, we expect, this in this situation, and here's the supporting evidence. So this is the sort of thing, didn't require, wild graphic skills, but it makes the points really clearly. It's not overwhelming. There's not too much text. I find this one quite nice. If you do have amazing graphic skills, then you can do something even nicer. And I just added this slide this morning. This is the most recent paper to come out of my research lab, and it's by a former PhD student of mine called Zoe Zerikostas. And Zoe just has awesome visual skills. And look at this, you can see this is her paper about the missing mutualist idea. This is the idea that when introduced species come to a new range, they don't just escape from their enemies, they also escape from their friends. And so Zoe's got this plant here, and it's got various friends and enemies, and she shows what's different between the introduced range and the native range. I think that's quite effective, but hey, different things work for different people, and I don't expect you to make absolute works of graphic art. Spend enough time on your visual figure that you make a nice point, but I don't expect professional level graphics. Okay, we're nearly there. Next stage, you've got your text down, you've got your bullet points, you've turned all of them into paragraphs, you've added the references for everything. You're going to need to edit. Every time you write, you need to write, read, edit, repeat. And the number of times we repeat before you actually publish a paper is quite astonishing. It's something like an average of about 25 drafts for grad students in my lab. It's a lot of drafts. Now here we want you to read through your own work, but you can also swap with other people in the class. That is not cheating, it's not plagiarism. You can help each other out, and you can learn by looking at somebody else's writing and sort of thinking about, now, how could this be done better? So that can actually be sort of a win-win for the both of you. Okay, at this point you should also look at the instructions again in the marking rubric. Have you done what was asked? Are you missing anything obvious? Is there something that you should strengthen at this point? The other thing you can do is to use the word grammar check or something like Grammarly. Now, neither of those is perfect, but they're really good at picking up silly errors. You don't want the person reading your work to get all bogged down in the fact that you've got, extra spaces and, spellings wrong and repeated words or whatever. Just use something to pick up the worst of those errors. They don't get everything perfect, but they're much better than not doing anything. And when you're writing, don't be too hard on yourself. Your first draft is probably going to stink. Mine do. It's okay. You then just have to revise and improve and make them better. So just start and use that bullet points approach, because that is really helpful too. Okay, the final formatting is also important. What we're asking you to do in this assignment is to actually follow the instructions to authors as if you were going to submit the paper to a real journal. And the journal is the Annals of Botany. And so you can look up their instructions. And when you submit a scientific paper, you actually need to do things the way they expect, because otherwise it looks like you don't know how the game is played and what you're supposed to do. So even though this seems wildly pedantic to most people, I know, it is important, because if you are asked to submit a grant proposal or a CV or a job application letter or something, or a publication, and you haven't followed the instructions, you really disadvantage yourself. You show that you don't know how this field works. So make sure the references are correctly formatted, present the paper in the way that you are asked to. So for most journals, they ask you to submit your manuscript as a double-spaced with line numbers and various, different things. Okay, it's not the same as what you see in the journal. So we don't want you trying to format it as if it's actually already published in a journal. We want you to format it as if you're submitting it to the journal. Couldn't give this without saying, please don't do plagiarism. It really isn't worth it. We can catch it so easily now. Your research paper will be run through Turnitin. So whenever you're doing this, resist the temptation to use copy-paste. Like, you might read an awesome sentence from a paper and just go, oh yeah, I'll just copy that. But what if you forget that you copied it from someone else's paper? If you don't edit it so that it is now in your own words, then you're going to be pulled up on plagiarism. And that just is awful to have to go through. So never copy and paste, always paraphrase things when you go to write them down, and then you don't run any risks. Okay, I just wanted to make a couple of points about how citations of previous work goes, because not everybody knows how to do this. So we're starting with an example from a real paper. Moles in 2018, in their paper, they say, globally, seed mass varies over more than 10 orders of magnitude, and Moles is citing Harper et al. 1970 for that. Right. So having read that, would it be okay for me to cite Moles 2018 as support for the statements that plants make seeds in a wide range of sizes? My paper said it, right? No, I can't be cited for that because Moles 2018 doesn't actually provide any evidence that plants make seeds in a wide range of sizes. All Moles does is cites Harper for that. So what you need to do is go to Harper's paper. Okay, so I've read Moles's paper. Can't I just write plants make seeds in a wide range of sizes and then cite Harper? Because that's what Moles has cited for that statement. And the answer there is no. And the reason is that Moles might have miscited Harper. I've actually kind of wanted to do a study on this to just quantify how often things are miscited in the literature. It is all the time. Do not trust this dodgy Moles person to have got that correct. Actually go and look at Harper yourself, and then you can cite Harper for that. Okay, same example here. Can I write in my paper, globally seed mass varies over more than 10 orders of magnitude, and then cite Moles for it? And the answer there is no, absolutely don't do that, because what you're doing there is you're using my words. You're using globally seed mass varies, the same words, and you haven't actually acknowledged that that comes from me. So by citing me, that's one thing, that's saying I provided evidence for that statement. But citing me doesn't get you out doesn't give you a pass to use somebody else's words. If you're using somebody's words, you have to use the quote marks, otherwise it's plagiarism. The other thing that's plagiarism, and this comes important with the review paper, because I know a lot of people are trying to show off how many things they've read, is you can just copy and paste a whole reference list from somebody else's paper and paste them in as if you read them, right? You can't. That's plagiarism too. And it's got all sorts of problems in terms of, what are the chances that all of those really supported what they're being cited for? You're going to sort of end up misciting things. And it is just dishonest to try and pretend as if you'd read all of those things and critically assessed the information in them. It is a form of plagiarism.